Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Simple Lie, a heart-stopping psychological thriller by Mary Bush. Narrated by Lauren Ezzo. 1. Eastville Projects, 2:59 a.m. Francine Donohue slipped out of bed and grabbed her gun from the top of the nightstand. What in the hell was that? With her finger poised on the trigger, she glanced around the room, but couldn't see much in the darkness. It sounded like a door slamming. She was sure of it. She waited for another minute, remaining still, alert, prepared, listening hard for anything more. The only sound was her pulse thumping, echoing in her ears. Every nerve stood on edge as she peered around the dark room. Her gaze lingered on shadowy outlines of suitcases she'd packed just hours ago. She listened again. All was quiet, and she breathed deeply, trying to calm down. In the last couple of days, she'd been jumping at every noise. The slam must have come from the apartment next door. Goddamn neighbors again, either drunk or high. Always fighting, always smashing something. It never ends. Francine checked the time. The numbers on the clock flashed from 2:59 to 3 a.m. In a few hours, she would finally be out of this hellhole. Even though everything seemed all right, she couldn't relax. She crossed the room to the door and quietly pulled it open, hesitated for a second, then stepped out into the hallway. She moved slowly, her hand tight on the gun, turning on lights and carefully checking each room. In the kitchen, she parted the curtains above the sink and looked out from her first-floor window. Several cars were parked on the street. A lone neighbor had the lights on. No one was outside. No one was in her apartment. Everything was fine. She walked back into her bedroom and shut the door behind her, locking it this time. She looked at the suitcases again and thought of leaving now, but was just too exhausted to start a long drive. For the last 36 hours, she'd been anxious and awake, drifting off for only momentary reprieves. Delirium was setting in. She had to hold it together. Things were going as planned so far, and she just had to keep her head straight. A few hours of sleep, that's all she needed. As she got into bed, she slipped the gun under her pillow this time. Francine didn't even remember closing her eyes when the sound of another slam dragged her out of a deep sleep. This time, she didn't jump. She couldn't. Her hand darted under the pillow for the gun, but her fingers fumbled, sliding off the handle as she tried to grasp it. What the hell? She struggled to lift herself, but could only get partway up. Her body felt strange, heavy, as if she was trying to move through thick mud. Every movement was a chore, an exertion that was becoming more difficult by the second. Then suddenly her body froze, and she slumped, falling back on the bed. Oh my God, what's happening to me? She attempted to move her arms, her legs, but a loud bang grabbed her attention, and she gasped for air. When she heard the next sound, her heart began to pound wildly, racing as if it would jump out of her chest. A voice was calling her name. Seconds later, Francine felt someone standing over her, watching her. She tried to turn her head and speak, but couldn't do either. There was no need to see the person who was now just inches from her face. She knew who it was. She knew what was going on. You didn't check your bedroom closet when you got up. I was in there the whole time. I'm surprised at you, Francine. Who checks their entire apartment and then neglects the closet? You really ought to be more careful. Don't you know the closet is one of the places monsters hide? Jesus Christ, the gun. I need the damn gun. Francine's thoughts spun uncontrollably as she fought panic. She forced herself to focus. If she didn't, she would die. I slammed the door a couple of times to get you going. I could have just woken you up in an ordinary way, but really, where's the fun in that? As Francine stared at the ceiling, blinking rapidly, her fingers twitched, and her body began to feel lighter, like she was regaining control. Frantically, she tried to move. She longed to feel the cold steel in her hands. It was so close, still hidden under the pillow. Hands prodded at her hard and fast, assessing her muscle tone. I'm sure you've figured out by now you've been drugged. I did it while you were sleeping. Thank God for chloroform and muscle relaxants. They really do make things easier. But you've been able to blink your eyelids all along, and now your fingers are moving. It shouldn't be wearing off yet. I might have miscalculated the dosage. Francine curled her fingers into a fist and then opened them again, repeating the motion, hoping to awaken her arms. She froze when she heard the sound of a zipper opening, followed by a loud clank of metal objects hitting together, then the rustling of plastic. You're probably wondering how I found you. You must be. Any smart person would. That's what I like about you, Francine. You're smart. That's how you got this far, how you've managed to hide for so long. But unfortunately, you have a really stupid side, too. And that's why you're not going to get away. Her whole body was tingling. It was coming around. In just a few minutes, she'd be able to grab the gun. Francine didn't have a few minutes. 2. West River Road, 11 a.m., 2 days later. Dr. Valentina Knight, DDS, walked out her back door and checked her watch again. The interview was in an hour. The drive would take 20 minutes. She had plenty of time. Val looked up at the clear sky, squinting from the glare of the sun. A beautiful day like this should have been a sign of promise, of good things to come. But she just couldn't get in the spirit. Promise had betrayed her more than once. No, she didn't believe in promise anymore. She reached into her bag and pulled out a pair of sunglasses. After a sleepless night, her eyes were heavy, and the bright sun only made them burn. Though Val tried to remain positive, stress gnawed at her stomach, creating waves of nausea. If she didn't get a job, she wouldn't be able to pay her growing pile of overdue bills. This week alone, 4 desperate interviews had led to nothing. The one scheduled for this morning was her last chance. No more were lined up, nor would they be for the immediate future. With all of her potential prospects exhausted, everything rested on the outcome of today. The advertised pay wasn't great with this position, but Val could manage it. Plus, benefits were included. Jesus, this would be a lifesaver until she could find something better. Unfortunately, anything better wouldn't be in the dental field. She hadn't practiced in over a year. She couldn't anymore. Damn, when did that happen? Val took a deep breath, attempting to calm herself, then picked up a broken piece of clapboard hanging from the side of her house. She turned it over, revealing a large section of rotted wood. A quick inspection of the adjoining pieces showed that they too were about to fall apart. It was just one more problem, and at this point, definitely not a minor architectural detail. The place was in need of a major overhaul. Advertised as a handyman special, the 101,000 square foot fixer-upper wasn't just reasonably priced, it was cheap for the address of West River Road on Grand Island, New York. The properties along this road on the west side of the island face the Niagara River, allowing a view of the water before it inevitably drops over an edge 12 miles downstream, creating Niagara Falls. Val had thought that she had a good investment when she'd bought it last spring, after moving back home from Clearwater, Florida. She'd assumed she would eventually be able to pay someone to fix the house up. But this was yet to happen. She had never imagined she'd go so long without getting some type of work. If she didn't get this job, the bank would take the house soon. The number of foreclosure notices sitting on her kitchen counter said it all. In the shape it was in, the bank wasn't getting a gem. But they'd be getting her house. Her home. She dropped the clapboard and headed towards the garage, ignoring the 2 gutters also hanging loose. Traffic was light for the late morning commute, and she drove down the highway quickly, heading east towards the city of Buffalo, New York, to the Erie County Medical Examiner's office, the county morgue. The position was described as a medico-legal death scene investigator, something she'd never even heard of before. From what Val learned through an internet search, the death scene investigator assists the medical examiner by investigating the nature of any suspicious or violent death, and determines if any additional investigation is needed. Usually, there are no formal education requirements, unless stated otherwise. Thank God there were none in this case, but some knowledge of medicine and law was highly recommended. This ad did say they were looking for someone with a medical and/or legal background, though the specifications were a bit vague. Val knew she could be stretching it a bit with her qualifications, but hoped her dental training was close enough to claim a medical background. More importantly, the ad said nothing about needing experience. Lack of experience in any field outside of dentistry had been a curse so far. She'd spent the last year applying for various positions, but was always either underqualified or overqualified. Even the local grocery store chain wouldn't hire her as a manager. Well, not without a degree in business management. Nor would they take her as a grocery checker. "You're a doctor. We can't hire you for that job," they said, as if they were doing her a favor. All of her interviews had gone the same way. Val had never thought her life would come down to this. But who does? No one sees the end until it's too late. Promise can be very deceptive. A Pied Piper for the unsuspecting. She gripped the steering wheel tight and put on her turn signal. The exit leading to the hospital that housed the medical examiner's office was coming up. A little more than a year ago, she'd had a thriving practice in Clearwater, Florida. With an income climbing well into the 6-figure range, she enjoyed her lifestyle as one of the up-and-coming professionals in her area. 4 years at college, 4 more years in dental school, then 10 years in practice had got her to the point where, for the first time in her life, she didn't have to worry about money, her future, her confidence. It only took 30 seconds to end it all. She often replayed those last seconds in her mind, searching for something that could have been done differently. But nothing could have turned this twist of fate in her favor. There was no way that she could have ignored Mr. Tate's injury. He was her patient, for God's sake. And there was no way anyone could have predicted what he'd do to her, especially with the cops right outside the examining room door. 3 surgeries and 6 months of physical therapy had helped restore most of the mobility to her left hand. For all outward appearances, there was nothing wrong with her, except for the ugly scar that ran down her thumb and partially across her palm. She was not disabled. She could work. At least, that's what the doctors said, which led to the decision of the disability insurance people to deny her any benefits. It was when it came down to the fine, intricate, detailed work demanded in dentistry that she couldn't perform. Val had to face the fact that being a dentist wasn't an option anymore. With her life falling apart, all she wanted to do was go home, to Buffalo, hoping to find salvation in the comforting feeling of familiarity, of life before dentistry, before success, of promise. She had found a career once. She could do it again. Couldn't she? Rounding the corner in front of the Erie County Medical Center, Val pulled into the parking lot. She checked the clock on the dash. As anticipated, the drive didn't take that long. Now what to do? She was early. But early is a sign of a good employee. Val opened the car door and stepped outside. It was unseasonably warm for the middle of April, the temperature cracking 70 degrees already. As Val walked towards the building, beads of perspiration formed on her forehead, the heat adding to the effect of stress, which had already caused her to feel as if she had soaked through her blouse. Pulling the clinging material away from her body, Val worried about her choice of dress. Agonizing over every detail, second-guessing herself. Jesus, she couldn't help it. Today she wore a little more makeup than usual, mostly to hide the dark circles under her eyes from lack of sleep. Her silk blouse was slightly too fancy, and her snug black pencil skirt was perhaps a tad too short. She'd bought these items while climbing the social ladder in Florida. Patients came to her office to spend thousands of dollars on cosmetic dental work. What would they think their teeth would end up looking like if their dentist had a crappy appearance? She had no money to buy a conservative suit for interviews now, but her shoes were a sensible height, and the briefcase she carried was professional. This should balance things out. Val tried to reassure herself that being petite, she could pull off wearing something short without appearing inappropriate. Plus, her long, brown hair was demurely pulled back in a barrette, and she wore black framed glasses over her dark, almond-shaped eyes. When she was younger, men found her attractive, mostly because of her eyes, which gave her a slightly exotic look. Now, at 36, she wasn't sure where she stood with the opposite sex anymore. Other than seeking a job, she hadn't been out of the house much in the past year. As Val entered the building, she wiped her sweaty palms on her skirt and pulled down on the hem, then approached the secretary, who was sitting behind a large window of what appeared to be bulletproof glass. A speaker in the middle of it was attached to a microphone on the other side. To the left of the window were large metal doors, presumably to enter the rest of the building. They had big warning signs. Alarm will sound, and restricted area, and wait for lock to open. Jesus, is this the medical examiner's office or the goddamn U.S. Mint? Val waited as patiently as she could, her foot tapping anxiously on the floor, but the woman behind the glass ignored her. The nameplate on the desk read Betty Fletcher. Betty had a telephone pressed to her ear, and made no effort to discontinue her conversation to greet her. Val wondered if Betty knew the microphone was on, because she could hear everything Betty said. DNA results are pending on that skull found in Chestnut Ridge Park. The one missing all the teeth? Pause. The hiker found it on one of the trails. From what I heard, you couldn't miss it. Detective Gavin thinks it was put out in the open on purpose, that it was supposed to be seen. He talked to several people who were on that trail only the day before and it wasn't there. Pause. It must belong to Jean Coleman. You know, the murdered woman that had all her teeth ripped out. Val's ears perked up at the mention of teeth ripped out, and listened closely, waiting for Betty to say more. After 2 months with no leads, nothing at all, the case was getting cold. And then this happens? Reporters were here most of the day yesterday. All hell broke loose after that. Val knew the case Betty was talking about. You could hardly miss the coverage, which had been on every news station. Several months ago, Jean Coleman had been found dead in her apartment, the victim of a savage attack. She had been stabbed repeatedly, and then dismembered. The killer photographed the victim throughout the murder, and left the pictures behind, so that cops, and everyone else, would know exactly what happened to her. Given the brutality, let alone advertisement of the crime. Initial speculation focused on the possibility of a gang-related killing. Someone was sending a message. But nothing about Jean's lifestyle fitted with this theory. The fact that she was murdered like that made little sense. One of the oddest issues of the case was that she'd had her teeth removed and then placed on the bedroom pillow. The rest of the body parts were missing, and so far, none of the pieces had been recovered. Well, not until now. Now, murmurs of a serial killer spread across the headlines. Betty finally glanced up and quickly put the phone down. "Can I help you?" Val jumped to attention, her pulse quickening. "I'm here about the death investigator position. I have an interview today. I'm afraid I'm a little early, though," she said, holding her head high, back straight. Then leaned one elbow on Betty's counter with as much careless confidence as she could work up. "Interview? Today?" Betty checked her computer. After a few seconds, she smiled, got up from the desk, and pushed a button on the wall. The large metal doors opened. "No kidding about being early. We weren't expecting you until next week. Please, come in." Val entered through the doors, confused, correcting Betty immediately. "Next week? No, my interview is today. I wish they'd tell me when these things change. I'm always the last to know." Betty made her way back to the computer and searched through the schedule again. "I don't see you listed for today." Her face focused on the screen. "Your original appointment for next week is still here." Val narrowed her eyes, still trying to comprehend what was going on. Did I get the day wrong? Oh well, I'm not surprised to see the scheduling mix-up. I was off sick and we had a temp in here last week. I'm still trying to fix things. I'll call Dr. Blythe and see what I can do. Oliver spoke so highly of you that I know Dr. Blythe will be happy to meet with you today." Betty picked up the phone. "This should only take a few minutes." Val felt her stomach nervously flip. She did call last week to inquire about the status of her application for the job, so that would explain the scheduling error by this incompetent temp. But who was the person who spoke so highly of her? She didn't know any Oliver. She was so deep in thought, she jumped when Betty spoke. "So I heard you met Oliver when he was in Rochester. He was such a great man. I can't believe he's gone. It just goes to show. You never know when your time's going to be up," Betty said, dropping the phone down a little from her ear. "Anyway, with Oliver's glowing recommendation, Dr. Blythe will be relieved to have you start. Things have just been so hectic around here." Met Oliver in Rochester? Glowing recommendation, relieved to have me start? Suddenly, it all became painfully clear. Betty thought she was someone else. This job belonged to someone else. Her own interview was probably a courtesy interview to satisfy human resources and state hiring guidelines. In other words, a waste of time for anyone not promised a job internally or on the side. In an instant, all hope disintegrated. Val became lost, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond her control. Her life was falling apart, the last bits shattering and falling in a chaotic heap as she stood in the front office of the county morgue. She was broke, and without the promise of a paycheck soon, she was about to become homeless, too. Val didn't say a word. She couldn't. The room felt like it was swirling, and she was about to fall over. Betty just stared, her eyes wide. Then her expression seemed to turn sympathetic. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to startle you. I thought you knew Oliver had died." Betty's voice sounded far away. Val managed to answer, confused. "Died? It was an aneurysm. He went so suddenly." Val felt outside of herself, with no control over her own faculties. and then, without realizing what she was doing, said, "So Oliver had good things to say about me?" As the words left her mouth, she couldn't believe the outright lie she'd just told. But hopeless situations call for desperate behavior. Survival instinct forced her to focus. Betty smiled and placed her hand on Val's shoulder. "Yes, he said Gwen Carmody was one of the best." The seconds ticked by as Val thought of what to do next. Desperation clung tightly, making the decision clear. What could be lost at this point other than dignity? And dignity wasn't going to put food on the table or a roof over her head. Val was pretty sure the next lie she was about to tell wasn't criminal. Besides, what was the worst they could do? Have security escort her out? If she was coming back to the morgue any time soon, it wouldn't be under circumstances in which she'd have the capacity to really care about. "I think there might be some confusion. I'm Dr. Valentina Knight, a dentist. Oliver must have told both Gwen Carmody and me about this job. Gwen is one of the best, but he thought I'd be better suited for this position." Val breathed hard as perspiration rolled down the back of her neck. Her face felt hot, and she began to wonder if her lie was showing. I'm so sorry, I had no idea. Oliver only mentioned one person," Betty stammered, then suddenly turned her attention to the phone, and Val took the opportunity to try to steady her breathing. "Yes, Candace? Is Dr. Blythe available to speak to a Valentina Knight?" When Betty responded, she lowered her voice, clearly sounding uncomfortable speaking in front of Val. "She's here about the death investigator position. It seems Oliver recommended her?" There was a longer pause. "I know that, but apparently Oliver spoke to her about it, too." Betty's voice became still as she listened. Clearly, there was more discussion going on the other end of the line. She finally said, "Okay, I'll send her back." "Dr. Knight, please come with me. I'll introduce you to Dr. de Havilland." "Dr. de Havilland? Didn't you mention a Dr. Blythe?" "Dr. Blythe is the chief medical examiner and is in the middle of an autopsy right now. Dr. de Havilland, the deputy medical examiner, is just finishing up and can talk to you." Betty led Val down a long corridor and into an office, saying nothing as they walked. Val was thankful for the silence. She wasn't quite sure how she would have responded to any questions. The only thought on her mind was keeping this house of cards from crashing down on her. "Please have a seat. I'll tell Dr. de Havilland you're here. She should be right in." Val sat in the chair, heart in her throat, wondering how on earth she would pull this off. She needed to stay calm, or this would just go from bad to worse. As she waited, she anxiously looked around the room, searching for anything she could use to start small talk with, anything she could use as a distraction if she got backed into any uncomfortable corners regarding this Oliver person. The only reason they let her in today was because of her supposed connection to him. There were diplomas in thick wood frames on the wall. The largest one, above the desk, displayed a medical degree from the University of Michigan to a Julia de Havilland. Across the room was another diploma, this one for a Ph.D. in pathology from the same university. The room was furnished in dark mahogany. Persian carpeting in shades of gold, blue, and burgundy covered the floor, completing the effect of an inviting office. For all of the pleasing colors, there was only a thin veneer of warmth in the room. The rest gave off a sense of sterility. There were no pictures on the desk or on the bookcases. In fact, other than the degrees, nothing personal was in the room. It had a feeling of remoteness, a distance at odds with the welcoming decor. Val began to chew at her nails. There was nothing in this room, no photos of children, a significant other, nothing to help move a conversation away from the topic of Oliver if need be. Jesus Christ. Val's heart pounded harder. I don't even know what this man's last name was, or what in...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?